After the Burnsville shooting took the lives of three first responders, a Wisconsin sheriff blasts Minnesota's DFL leadership. His message went viral, and now St. Croix County Sheriff Scott Knudson speaks exclusively to Alpha News. Next. Sheriff Knudson, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate the time.
Well, thank you, and I really appreciate you having me on.
For anyone who hasn't seen it, you posted a video to your department's Facebook page a week after Burnsville, Minnesota police officers Paul Elmstrand, Matthew Ruge, and firefighter paramedic Adam Finseth were murdered. Just to let people know, the video is 14 minutes long. I do encourage everyone to watch every minute of it. You spend quite a bit of time talking about Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Just on background, Walz held a press conference following the shooting. You say it was disingenuous and a photo op. But why did you want to call him out specifically in that video, Sheriff?
That Sunday morning, I had received the call. I was actually in the office when my phone started to blow up about these Burnsville officers that had been murdered. My first call was to Minnesota, right across the river, to speak with the sheriff over there and kind of get more information and see what we could do to help if we could. I then made my way over to Hennepin County to the medical center and was along in that group as we escorted those heroes. So my emotion from really our event on May 6th of last year when Katie was killed was kind of starting to bubble up. Now, as we know, the last 4 years have been beyond difficult in so many different arenas for law enforcement. When you had the COVID, but then we had the civil unrest and the fallout right during that unrest. And some of the most impactful and what I felt damaging comments during that time were from Governor Walz. Again, these two incidences, national profile incidences that took place, tragic. There's no way around the tragedy that occurred. But his comments right after painted us to be racist and killers. He made the comment that, it was not safe to be a black person in Minnesota. Well, that put all of us in the crosshairs in our opinions. So right off the bat, even before any of the investigation took place, this was already done. And by those statements, it really painted a picture that regardless of what evidence was coming, we were the bad guys. We were the killers. Again, the court process played out the way it played out, but I felt those comments were reckless and dangerous. And then I see the press conference for Burnsville. And I had spoken with several of the Minnesota law enforcement leaders, one with a connection to Burnsville, the former chief. And as we discussed it, there was some frustration with politicians' involvement in it. And Governor Walz gets up there, and one of the comments he makes is, let's let this investigation play out. Well, I immediately yelled at my screen of, you've never let an investigation play out when it involves law enforcement. Now, when we have 3 dead people, you're making statements of let this play out. We need to support law enforcement. It's an honorable profession. Well, to me, that seemed very disingenuous. That wasn't the message that he had shown years prior and leading up to. There's just been a consistent non-backing of law enforcement. As difficult as our jobs are, split-second decisions, some of them, sadly, life or death, those that we deal with or us. And now to come out and what I felt pretend like you're concerned about us. I talked to Sheriff Fletcher the night. He had it absolutely pegged when he said, can somebody care about us before we get killed? I thought that was a profound statement and as true as it comes. So it did seem quite disingenuous to me that now, next to our coffins, several politicians step up and say, our condolences, we need to honor, we need to, well, you either don't like us and support us or you do. You've already made it clear that you don't.
Sources have told Alpha News that Governor Walz was not welcome at the public memorial. He was basically kept in a back room until that public memorial started, and then quickly ushered out afterwards. We did reach out to Governor Tim Walz in his office to respond to your comments. We have not heard back. I'm wondering if you've heard anything back from Governor Walz or anyone else that you called out in this video, including Attorney General Keith Ellison, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, or even Hennepin County Attorney Mary Moriarty, for that matter. I did want to mention, Sheriff, I know you don't know too much about this, but it's worth noting that also on the day of the memorial for the first responders who were murdered, you did have Hennepin County Attorney Mary Moriarty holding an expungement clinic for felons on that day. Just talk about the message that sends, and then if you've heard anything in response to this from them.
Well, first, I hadn't heard anything. I didn't expect to. I don't know why those four would care what a Wisconsin sheriff had to say. Even though I was speaking something that I felt the Minnesota law enforcement community was silently screaming in their heads for years, these concerns. So no, none of them had reached out. I also want to make it very clear as we talk about, Governor Walz and these other three. For me, this is not, in my county in St. Croix, I have wonderful bipartisan support. I have a number of those on the Democratic side that have supported me. We have a referendum coming up next month to add officers as well as mental health co-responders. A number of Democratic people have come out to say, how do we help get this passed? For me, this isn't a Democrat-Republican thing. This is the four people with platforms in Minnesota that I feel are really causing the most issues. Again, good Democratic people. I know a number of them, and a number of them I call very good friends. I'm not going to chastise an entire party when I'm on here now trying to defend our entire profession from being, painted with a broad brush of you're all racist, you're all killers. It'd be quite, it just wouldn't work for me to now go after an entire group, and I'm not going to do that. Now we get on to Mary Moriarty. It is very interesting that the day of fallen officers and their funeral, murdered by a felon, the timeliness seemed very in our face, very unfortunate, a slap to the families. I'm going to jump over to, and I know this is coming a little later, why do I care? I'm going to go to the felon that was from Minnesota that crossed the border and killed our deputy, Katie Lysing. He was a sex offender, had a firearm, serial number scratched off the firearm, wasn't supposed to be in Wisconsin. So I have great interest when it comes to the expungements, the felons, and how these things are handled, because we were very impacted personally and emotionally by a felon out of Minnesota. So for Mary to do that when a felon had just murdered these three Burnsville heroes is kind of mind-blowing to me. Very tone deaf.
Sheriff Knudson, I did want to talk more about that, Katie Lysing's death. She died in the line of duty on May 6th of 2023. As you said, responding to help, this was a call about a drunk driver stuck in a ditch, just 29 years old, when she is murdered. Talk more about that, how her death has affected your entire department.
It has been very impactful. It's been very emotional. We've, just like so many other agencies, surviving family members, this is devastating. Katie left a 3-month-old son, and that's, for us, is absolutely heartbreaking. The manner in which it happened is beyond angering. That the POS then went and killed himself before we could get to him, to figure out why, was also as angering as you can have, because our guys wanted to get them. So there, yes, the emotion of sorrow, grief, anger, all of that in Katie's death. But as you see her number behind me, one thing we want to do is honor that memory. We want to honor everything about what Katie brought and that smile. So, but we also want to remember all our fallen heroes. You know, Emily Breidenbach and Hunter Scheel from Cameron and Chautauqua. They were a month prior. As people were at their funerals and heading back, we find out that Josh Owen was killed over in Pope County. So the region was struck very hard. And then midsummer, Jake Wallane up in Fargo. You know, all these are heroes getting murdered by a criminal element that many in the system never want to recognize and address.
On that note, I know you also spoke recently with Shannon Owen, the widow of Pope County Deputy Josh Owen, also killed, as you mentioned, in the line of duty. And like you, Shannon is also speaking out. Explain that, though. Why should anyone listen? Why is this so important to all of us?
Well, it's important to all of us because it can happen to any of us. With a criminal element that's not held to account, to a group of individuals that, it seems the criminal's rights are more important than the victim's rights. Well, your law enforcement officers, those in the public protection profession, whether people like it or not, like us or not, we are an important part of our society, and we are the weave that holds society together. And when you start killing these peacemakers, those that take the drunk drivers off the road, those that break up the domestics, those that investigate the homicides, those that catch the child predators, when you start killing those people that are trying to stop that, you're damaging the fabric of society. You know, Josh Owen, Deputy Owen, family man, good community member, 10-year-old, 11-year-old son that he's left behind. You know, and he's killed by somebody that potentially, if mental health would have been addressed, we may not be in that situation. But there's so many cracks in our system, not unfixable, but it seems like those get pushed off to the side. And those in our professions, now for the first time that many can remember, a firefighter dies alongside of the cops. There's multiple professions now being impacted. What do firefighters now are starting to get equipped with? Body armor. Who would have thought that? But that's the way our society is going. Why should we care? Because our society, our fabric is getting torn apart, and with little to no support from people in high-level positions. And those were the four that I wanted to point out.
And Sheriff, we know that there are those, not speaking out. As we know, the saying is silence supposedly causes violence. I think that's how it goes. But like Governor Walz, I know your governor, Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers, hasn't exactly spoken out, hasn't shown overwhelming support, I would say, for law enforcement. What does that say about public safety in Minnesota and Wisconsin? And I guess just overall the state of law and order in America?
They're targeting the peacemakers. They're targeting those that put themselves in harm's way for people that they've never met, for many in society that they may never see again. I looked at Burnsville. Those three guys are in there, not knowing that family, but those children are number one. And all three of them die for it. It's beyond maddening. The leaders that their statements, they have to know that their statements do cause damage. Governor Evers as well, after the Kenosha incident. If they would have came right out and recognized and publicly acknowledged that this gentleman had a knife, but instead it went right to another shooting. Well, look at this, cops at it again. That's what angers me, is because those people in those positions had more information that they were willing to let out. And they let Kenosha burn, in my opinion. Again, maybe not the public or the popular opinion, but that's my opinion. That's what I saw. Minnesota, those poor cops, they can't speak up. In a police department with mayors and politics driving much of the narratives, they're kind of backed up into a corner. Their hands are tied with certain with certain narratives that are out there that aren't true. So.
Yeah, and I know that we're very early on in the investigation in Burnsville, but I think just overall to a lot of these incidents, we've covered the policy changes, which in fact are hard to even keep up with, especially in Minneapolis and all throughout the state of Minnesota, the public pressure, the lies about the profession. How does that, does it create a sense of hesitation on the job or otherwise change how police officers would respond? That's something I think that very few people address as well.
There, with the great burden of some of the public perceptions, again, many that are fueled by certain politicians, some in the media, and I also want to say when I talk about that, I've met a lot of wonderful people in the media, a lot of wonderful reporters that have done some great stories, many on Katie, but they have bosses as well, just like the mayors, when there's that kind of pressure and knowing or the belief that we aren't going to get an opportunity for the evidence to be shown, all of the evidence to be shown, there is hesitation. I spoke with one of the officer a couple months back that was over in Minnesota, and he was wrestling with a guy, and gentleman was, there's plenty of drugs on board, and he's thinking, if this guy dies while we're fighting, I'm going to prison. So now we're starting to hesitate. We're starting to second guess. We're starting to kind of pull back. And when we hesitate, we get hurt. When we hesitate, bystanders get hurt, right? Domestics, someone's going to get killed. We're not going to be forceful enough to stop a situation because, we're thinking, all right, well, how is this going to play out when many have had a chance to review it for hours and days? I have seconds to make this decision. Do I need a couple more seconds to make this decision? And oftentimes we don't have a couple more seconds. But then we start to hesitate and then people get hurt. People have also talked about, well, look at the number of officers killed now and the number of officers killed in the 70s. And, they're trying to make correlations. I want one thing to be clear is there's still a lot of cops getting killed. There would be more if we didn't have the technology that we have today, the body armor, the medical knowledge of these officers in the field, and those things that help us in those instances. Our tactics have changed over the years. So there's so many reasons that officer survival has improved. But that doesn't mean we're not being assaulted. That doesn't mean we're not being seriously injured. That doesn't mean we have career-ending injuries. But it would seem that for some politicians and for some that are part of that anti-law enforcement, that we're just casualties of the profession that we chose, and so be it. We kind of get what we get.
Well, I think you spoke up at the right moment, certainly, and you spoke for so many. But St. Croix County Sheriff Scott Knudson, thank you so much for joining me, and again for speaking out when others cannot.
Thank you, and I do appreciate you having me on. Some will ask why I'm on this platform. I will say that there were several other media outlets that, during the weeks that followed, I attempted to get this message out. I shared my views. I shared my views towards Walls, Moriarty, Keith Ellison, and Ilhan Omar. All of them can kick rocks. Those four can kick rocks. I tried to get this out before. Nobody wanted it. Nobody would touch it. So to you, I thank you very much for giving this platform and giving this out a little bit more, because these officers need to know they're important. They need to know that so many in the community support them. It's the loud, platform-driven politicians that are pushing back. But just know that we are in the good fight. Our citizens need us. Every community needs us. And hang in there. We are in the good fight.
Again, Sheriff Scott Knudson, we thank you for your service and thank all the men and women of the St. Croix County Sheriff's Department for us.
Thank you very much.
That will do it for this episode of Liz Collin Reports. We'll see you next time.